want to make it really difficult for a presenter. You bring people in from across the globe, make them really tired from inspirational tours and talks, and then you feed them a heavy lunch. Then you wait for 20 minutes or so when the lunch kicks in, and then you bring this person up. So I want to thank the organizing committee for their confidence in me. But I will do my best, and in particular I will not say anything that will surprise you. You already know this. Most of it is intuitive anyway, at least to individuals. But when groups larger than 5 are to plan together, they need a structure by which they can make better use of all the knowledge they have. So the collective knowledge in a big group is per definition always higher than in any of its individuals. And for us to make better use of that collective knowledge, we need to structure it. I will not say anything that will surprise you, you already know that. The title, but by the way, I will also say a lot of things as a sort of smorgasbord. I'll just lay out the dishes, which is linked to the framework. And most of the stuff that you would like to hear more of is explored scientifically. There are references to it, so just ask and I will ship you whatever you like. I also have another component to make up for a quite fast presentation or an outline of what we can offer. And that is that I have produced a little picture book for you. So I have taken notes to every slide I'm going to show. So if you like that picture book, you can get it afterwards and you don't need to take any notes. I've taken the notes for you. The title, Sustainability, More About Competence and Values, is something that is the main topic of my talk here. So many people believe that unsustainability is due to screwed up values in the population at large. Nothing could be more wrong. Furthermore, it would be extremely depressive because there would be no hope. Nothing will happen to the human constitution genetically for very, very long time periods, and we don't have that much time. Thanks God, it's also wrong. The values of people are generally wonderful, particularly when life shows harsh sides to us. Then we know what counts in life. Then it's love for our children and our near ones and all those other things that we all share. So there's nothing wrong with values, but the competence is going down as we are confronted with new paradigms. So people simply don't know what to do. That's the problem. Particularly when we are to cooperate. If you believe that something is wrong about our values, then the next terminology follows from that. It's called greenwash. So people are talking about sustainability, and the assumption is that they don't mean it. Why is the assumption that? Because too little happens. But if people don't know what to do, why would you expect a lot to happen after people having committed to wanting to do something? So actually, competence is much more important upfront than values. Then values and differences in values are okay and important and all that, but that's more about the style when we approach sustainable development. But we must still know what it is, we must still frame it. Whatever values we have, then we go down the drain unless we can make it sustainable. There's another thing I would like to highlight. And very few people have thought about this, but intuitively I think you get it. If you are gradually removing yourself from being part of the problem, that will be good for your outcome personally, regardless of what the others do. When you hear people without this competence talking, they say, yeah, well, okay, I understand that we need some political measures to put tax on unsustainable behaviors and some legislation and all that. But you see, and I'm for it, because I love my grandchildren and so forth and so on. However, if you put that onto us here in Sweden, that would distort market competition if we put harsher legislation on ourselves than onto others. And when you hear someone say that, it is not because they have poor or screwed values, it's because they don't understand a game. To sensitize people for this kind of presentation of a big picture and structuring it well, There are 3 questions, and only when you put them together, they are magic. If you ask anybody about the first question, you have a definition of sustainability. People generally can't stop talking. Sustainability has come to stay. It makes perfect sense. It's about values, it's about ethics, and ethics and values and business can walk perfectly hand in hand, blah, blah, blah. And all of that is actually based on good values and so forth and so on. So there's nothing wrong with it, but the only problem is that it's not the definition. And that does not show unless you ask the second question. So what is, with reference to your own definition, your gap to sustainability? What remains to be done? And then, what are you then, at the strategic level of the organization, doing to bridge that gap? And if you ask all 3 of them together before a conference of this kind, people generally come and say, help us. Because you cannot use a mental intent or a story as a definition. And it only follows if you ask questions 2 and 3. It's really magic. Try it. To be able to tackle the big picture and frame it so that we can make better use of tools and so forth, we need systems thinking, which individuals are very good at. But the larger the groups get, the poorer it gets. Why is that? So big groups generally fail to come to grips with the connectedness in the system. What is it? What are the constituents of the system that connect all the detail? So in a big group of people, with ingenious people, you have division of labor. So you have economists, which are extremely important for sustainable development, and engineers and politicians and so forth and so on. And all of them master their own parts of the system. But how does it all connect? And unless you can frame that, how could they cooperate? That's the problem. If you look at the big system and you ask individuals, I'm not talking about boardrooms with groups larger than 5 now, I'm talking about individuals. What do you think about forests? Have we at last stopped losing forests at the global level, or do you think that we may still lose a few? They generally know the answer. What about agriculture? Do you think that topsoil layers at last are getting richer and fatter and nutrients and so forth globally? Or do you think as an average that we are still losing some? They know the answers to this. So this is not the problem. Maybe there are some glitches here. This is also measured. That the interpersonal trust between people, the likelihood that I would trust someone I don't know just because I meet this person where I happen to live or whatever, that likelihood is decreasing at the global level, which is extremely scary. In particular at a time when we need interpersonal trust and cooperation more than ever before because of the losses of all those other systems. So we are entering deeper and deeper into a funnel of declining potential to sustain society at large. Now if you ask a competitive CEO in an organization, where the attitude is business is war and sustainability is for women. We have that attitude, not here in this room, but I mean, it exists. If you ask that same person, what do you think will happen to resource costs as we keep losing resources in this funnel? And there will soon be maybe 9 billion people, not 6, bidding on the remainder in the system. Do you think that prices will go up or down? It's an insult to wait for the answer. They know. They already see it, by the way. If you ask that same, what will happen to costs for waste management, tax, legislation, and so forth and so on? They know that too. But in boardrooms larger than 5, if you ask them, what's the revenue for sustainable development? They lose the whole picture, and then they say, well, it's good for PR. It's good for PR. The main incentives for a business person or a mayor or anyone in charge of a big organization is to save resources as prices will just skyrocket, and to be innovative onto future markets, to deliver what people would want later on. Do you think that people would like to eat later on? Have clothes? Somewhere to live? Logistics? Sure. Who can provide them those services within those constraints of the future gold diggers of tomorrow, regardless of what politicians say? These things are just unfolding. They will happen. So therefore, to say that We don't want politicians to put any harsher legislation onto us because it will distort the market competition. It's just a way of telling people that they have not understood. Furthermore, that never before has paradigm shifts occurred like that. People waking up one morning and then suddenly there have been a global decision taken that now we are going to do this or that. So how do paradigm shifts occur in history? Always by proactive people who start to get it before the others and begin to be so clever, capitalizing on the new things happening, that they become the forerunners. And only when they have grown enough in numbers, you can be a proactive politician and begin doing legislation and put the thumb screws on those that are left behind in the paradigm shift. That's how it occurs. So the name of the game is to find people like you, who are prepared to move ahead in spite of that the others don't do it, and to do it cleverly to gain market benefits and to gain community building aspects and all the other resources that follow from being a forerunner into something that is inevitable, because this will happen regardless how we vote in the parliament also. The drive in this direction will happen regardless what we say and how we talk and on what parties we vote. So there are huge costs linked to being part of the problem, regardless of politicians. That's easy to understand intuitively, and believe me, if you say this to any aggressive business person around the world, they don't object. They see the logics beautifully well. So where's the problem? Here, on Monday morning, we're going to do something. And that's called reductionism. To seek knowledge, but drowning in information. Looking at one detail outside the context of all other details. And that in turn follows from the way society is organized in compartments or drill holes, as I prefer to call them. Not silos, but drill holes. What do I mean by that? Or rather, what did my wife mean about that? Because she invented the term. It's that scientists and specialists are digging deeper and deeper holes into ever increasing knowledge until only the feet are sticking up. And then there is no connection between all those experts at the level of their heads. So we drift further and further apart in the compartmentalized society. And for us to be able to cooperate, we obviously need a structured overview whereby all those drill holes are connected by a shared understanding of how they connect. I will give you an example of this. When I was heading a cancer unit at the university hospital many years ago, we tried to do that by a lecture series. So Bosse, a friend of mine, was allocated to bring all the lectures from that drill holes together every other Wednesday to present from the front line of science in his or her drill hole. And all of those professors were scared stiff to be perceived superficial in the eyes of the others. So when they were talking from the depth of that drill hole, nobody understood what they were saying. It was extremely deep, believe me, extremely deep, which meant that the whole exercise was completely irrelevant. So it didn't take long until all people were back in that drill holes and didn't attend these Wednesday meetings. At that same hospital, at that same time, we had an example of the opposite, where this worked beautifully. It's called clinical conference. Very easy to understand. Mrs. Anderson is going to die because she has cancer, unless we cure Mrs. Anderson. And to cure Mrs. Anderson, we need the drill holes. We need the pathologist in that drill hole because the diagnosis must be exact. And the radiologist because the distribution must be known. And then we need the radiotherapist and the surgeon and the medical doctor. And by cooperation, or through cooperation, today we cure well above 50%. And by cure, I mean cure. They live normal lives and die of something else at a high age, in more than 50%. And not one of those professional groups can cure Mrs. Anderson on their own. So they need each other. Why did it work? Because they had an exact picture of the big picture of cancer, exactly what that disease is, the big structure of it, the challenge that you must kill that last cancer cell without killing Mrs. Anderson, and without crippling her in any other aspect as well. So you put the healthy Mrs. Anderson ahead of you. The whole system is healthy. And then you look backwards in time and ask, what can we do jointly, cooperatively, to step-by-step move in that direction, while handling the problems that will hit us on the way. So you can't have a specific plan laid out for you, but the principles must be the same, and then you can start to play the game curing cancer. Today, at this conference, the patient is the global human society dying from the deadly disease unsustainability. And to cure that patient, we need economists, engineers, politicians, and how can they cooperate unless there is a framework by which they can frame and make use of all the phenomenal knowledge they have from the depth of their drill holes. Therefore, the framework I'm going to talk about, first of all, was not invented by me. It's invented by people in drill holes. I've just been a humble secretary. Secondly, it is not there to replace or trash any of the ingenious drill holes or innovations made in any of those drill holes. It's there to make better use of all the innovations, phenomenal innovations I would like to add from the depth of the drill holes. So there's nothing wrong with the drill holes. The problem is that we have those drill holes instead of an understanding of how they connect. To that end, what we needed was a theoretical approach whereby we would try out principles, check them on empirical data, going back here when the principles did not cover the data, going back and forward, scrutinizing the principles, and that is what is still going on in an ongoing learning dialogue, to create that framework at that level where we can have a clinical conference. That we must share together. And that level of knowledge in this system is not something that we can hand over to experts. That's the perspective of the big boss. So the big boss of any organization, the mayor, the CEO, must understand, must be able to speak intelligently about that level that you expect every expert in your team to share with you. Otherwise, we will fail. The reason is that the complexity in this system is too large, and the impacts human society is doing in the system, on the social system and the ecosystem, is too profound for us to succeed unless we know together at that principle level that makes a clinical conference possible. And that's what we did. So we set out to do that, and the natural step is just a footnote. That's the name of a growing organization relying on more and more experts joining that consensus process. And for us to not confuse ourselves in the dialogue, we kept those levels apart from one another. They should not be confused with one another. And if you don't confuse them with one another, they can have a dialogue with one another and enforce the significance of one another. So the first is the system level. Then you define that system level enough to be able to be certain that you know how to define success. Now, only now, can you be strategic. If you don't know where you want to be, you can per definition not be strategic. But there are more guidelines in there than knowing that, of course. And now you can foster your actions, everything you do. And now you can develop your tools to foster actions to be strategic to arrive at success in the system. And that is what the people in the clinical conference understand together. So we began with this system. We went through the thermodynamics, the conservation laws, the biogeochemical cycles, the interdependencies of species, the social system, and what we know scientifically about that, resilience, adaptivity, and so forth and so on, until we understood at that big bird's eye level why it is feasible or possible to live there at all and expect it to be sustainable. Why can't we eat sandwiches all the time and expect to get more sandwiches since we convert sandwiches to waste? How is that even possible? How can we burn fuels and expect to get more? And once we laid out that, and quite much in detail, fleshed it out more and more in consensus, we asked ourselves, how can we destroy this system? Because that's what we're doing. And then putting a knot in basic mechanisms of destruction. Beginning with that big picture, primary mechanisms by which we destroy it. The first one is that we allow mined materials to systematically increase in concentration in the system. That's how we behave. Secondly, we allow also chemicals to systematically increase in the system. We never say that. Instead, we say PCB, DDT, dihydrogens, freons, and so forth and so on. And we send out experts having conferences on eutrophy and toxicity in otters and so forth and so on. But the generic constitutional flaw is not on the table, the way our societies are designed. The third is that we are not only polluting it by two different mechanisms, we are removing natural systems as well, more and more. It's okay to remove natural systems. You can put a big road onto fertile land. That's not unsustainable, of course. But to put more and more roads on fertile land is, of course, unsustainable. So it's always a dynamic component to understand sustainability. And the fourth is that you can ruin the social web, the social tissue, by systematically undermining people's capacity to meet their needs, mainly by abuse of power, and there are different powers you can abuse. And if you do that, trust erodes between people, and that's the glue in the social tissue. And if people don't trust each other anymore, barbarism follows, and then it's over for the ecosystems as well. So we are fighting against time, and it's all about competence in the beginning. Values are there. However, remember that values, as well as competence and intelligence, can be destroyed also in smart people. So there are extremely smart people can be trained to become stupid by flawed paradigms, for instance. Now we have then a robust definition of success. So in the sustainable society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing, and then I'm just repeating what I said, were the basic mechanisms for destruction. And then people are not subject to conditions that erode their capacity to meet their needs. And second order, and third, and higher order of principles follow from that. And I will return to how you then can use that to analyze all kinds of concepts and tools and make better use of them. But this is what you put at the level 2, success. What is so different? Are those principles that we have tested and that can be shared between any person in a group like this, in any organization, are they better than David Orr's design principles or Hannover principles or principles for zero emission and cleaner production and natural capitalism and so forth and so on? No, nothing of the kind. So what are they? They are the only ones that are defining and structuring the big scope of sustainability enough to be put for backcasting purposes. So you put them ahead of you as a tight, comprehensive definition that allows a clinical conference. And then you can ask, retrospect in time, what shall we do over here to make it here tomorrow? And for such principles to be operative, they must be necessary, otherwise they're not basic. They must be enough, otherwise there are gaps in the thinking. They must be general, that was the whole idea, otherwise the drill holes can't speak to one another. They must be concrete, otherwise they are philosophical stories again. And they must be distinct, otherwise you can't monitor your process to comply with those principles. Now, since we have then looked at success enough, we can be strategic. We refer to this as ABCD analysis of any project or any organization. A is understanding this together. B, assess today's situation from a point of winning, using those principles, just like we do in the clinical conference. What is Mrs. Anderson's problem today with all her feelings and emotions and the situation, her symptoms, from a point of being healthy in the future? Not in relation to how she was before, but mainly how is she doing in relation to complete health in the future. And you list those aspects that are problematic in that context. Then you list possible solutions regardless of how costly they are. That's the C endeavor, a brainstorming session. And once you have a long list of possibilities regardless of costs and how feasible they are, like a family game, you just list possible solutions that are scrutinized by the principles. Now you enter the D step. You choose those aspects from this list that can bring you step by step while earning financial resources, social resources, ecological resources enough to sustain the process. And it's amazing to see how big groups, being informed by that framework, become smart together instead of talking about values all the time and blaming one another, actually co-creating solutions. And it's only at the very end of those endeavors where they are to choose between one possible smart, intelligent early move and another that the values are brought to play. And that's fine. That's what we should do. But to start talking about values until the big picture is outlined and until the understanding is shared in the group, basing polarities on misunderstandings and poor knowledge, that is devastating. So each large investment are scrutinized by those questions. Will this take us in the right direction? Is it flexible to more things on the C list to be added later on? And will the return on investment be good enough to sustain the process? Otherwise you go bankrupt and then you have not helped anybody. And then, if you play this right, you can allow your competitors to go bankrupt instead, having bad luck confronted with the walls of the fund. Now down to action. We tried this in the business community first. So we were lucky working with IKEA in the early days. And then a whole series of companies where top management showed us that the framework, outlined as it was generic enough, though they helped us to refine it even more and make it even more understandable. So the framework underwent many revisions, becoming more and more precise and less difficult to misunderstand. We tested it on a number of sectors and it worked again. You can put agriculture in Sweden or Bangladesh and doing the same analysis. And indeed we have. Now comes the point for a conference on municipalities. Since any player, this miner, that factory, the transport organization, the construction organization, and so forth and so on, can apply the same framework, we have the clinical conference. So this actor can now make a B list of problems, a C list of possibilities, a D list of early smart chess moves that will bring this organization in the right direction while earning money. And since they all can, they can compare notes. And then you have the clinical conference. Now they can make business, merging forces over solutions and so forth to help each other. And again, when you sensitize people across communities, I would advocate the three magic questions. This is where they come in particularly handy. To sensitize people before workshops with those three questions. And generally they then want help and they are sensitized to what you bring. Consequently, this is now growing faster than ever on this particular arena. Local governments. It began in Sweden, and you heard initially that we had a few local governments growing out into quite a sufficient number of local governments, SECO, applying the overall idea of this framework. And then it has spread to Whisker, which I put right under there. It's right on the top. It's world renowned. And Ken is here. It's an honor to have him here. And then it has spread south, and now we have growing momentum around the big lakes, sharing experiences and helping us here in Sweden when we despair. We can meet with some aggressive, positive optimism from the United States and Canada. A few words about tools. We have so many tools today that they have begun to be perceived as confusing themselves. What do they do, and which of those tools do we need? I was invited by UNEP to Paris in the year 2000, I think, to lead work with the pioneers of those tools, just to assess what they did and in particular what they did not do. And the approach was, again, the same. We had all those pioneers. It was Biersmith-Leek for Factor 10 and Wackernagel for ecological footprinting and so forth, imagining, by use of the 5-level framework, that they would comply with the success principles. And then we are in a company they will lead, or a municipality. And then we had them respond to the following question. What can you use this tool for to make that transition possible? And what can you not use it for? And we did the same for all the others as well. And published it. And we published it in the UN's leading journal for sustainable development. And it is still the most downloaded article in the history of this journal because people are longing for comprehension. And the conclusions were that we have many good tools and concepts with their respective strengths and gaps. But I'm not talking about the tool now. I'm talking about having a big, unified framework that can make better use of tools by showing what they can be used for. When do you do that selection? When you have your C list, your wish list, your laundry list of what you want to do. You have your B list of problems. And you are outlining your plan how to get there. Now you can be, with your imagination, in success and ask retrospect, what tools do I need and how should I inform them to get here? Taking into account those aspects and what do I not need? So that we don't confuse goals with means and so forth. Will business jeopardize this is a question I should ask, and I just would like to return to it. Not at all, not if they get it. This is what Leif Johansson, head of Volvo, said just a few months ago, publicly in Sweden. He was a few years ago, or many years ago, leading Electrolux. And he said it was not until at least 10 years later we understood how many billions we had earned by using the United framework in our investments. So they had good luck all the time, whereas the competitors hit the walls of the funnel all the time. This is a more American way of saying the same thing. This is the founder of Interface, the leading manufacturer of flooring. They say, as we climb Mount Sustainability with those 4 principles at the top, we're doing better than ever on bottom line business. Not at the cost of social and ecological assistance, but at the cost of our competitors who still haven't got it. And then this is the chairman of Roman Haas, one of the leading chemical companies in the world, that have now promised in a press release that we are not only going to comply with those principles completely, becoming completely carbon neutral and all the rest of the stuff, which is mind-blowing for a chemical company to say, but we're going to help the world at large do the same. Watch us, that kind of American attitude as well. A few words about the not so obvious. If you know how to define that state, not in a babbly fashion, but in a concrete, precise way, then you can begin with the resource potential. You can begin with physics instead of previous practices and previous constraints of the technologies we have. The technologies and the efficiency of current technologies and machinery and so forth is so lousy that it's unimaginable. But instead, if you have robust principles, you can begin with physics. What is the resource potential of this system? And it's huge, which is very, very sort of rewarding. And that's a happy thought if you see that the world has a potential which is huge for certain flows and minimal or non-existing for others. And then you can start to step by step adjust accordingly. Another is that this is the only strategy by which you can sort out trade-offs in multidimensional problems. If something is good for something, you can bet that it is bad for something else. And very often the dimensions of those are different. It may be kilograms for one and speed on the other, or it may be toxicity for mercury on one and wasting energy on the other. How can you then choose? If you ask scientists to choose, they generally do. And they come up with different directions. One say do this because the benefits outweigh the bad stuff. And the other group of scientists say the opposite. And in science, we are not trained to always be true. So both scientific groups generally finish their papers by saying, but how it really is, future science must deal with. And when they write that last sentence, they don't have a clue what kind of science they are referring to, because if you have different dimensions, you don't have the answer. So how do you sort it out? Strategically. How do we play chess to get out of the trade-off situation and become healthy? Just like when we cure Mrs. Anderson. There are a huge amount of different dimensions where we are, and large groups are excellent in doing it if they know how to define where they want to be. Another not as obvious thing, but that comes as an extra sugar on the cake, is that it is an extremely nice mechanism behind community building to have a shared, robust vision of where to be and to move there jointly. Not only in clinical conferences. I can tell you, to cure a patient from cancer is just wonderful, and to dare to rely on all the other professional groups that you don't really understand what they're doing deep down in the drill holes, but they come up with beautiful solutions, and you add yours. And to jointly have that done is high five. And it's no less so saving the whole world from dying from unsustainability. And furthermore, you can integrate business goals or goals in societies and then make management systems much more comprehensive. I don't go into that now. I will just quickly reflect on it. What you do when you do that is that you have the sustainability principles, the 4 principles, but we don't live our lives to avoid cancer, nor to avoid unsustainability. We live our lives to meet our aspirations, and our lives tick because we are longing for something. You put those intrinsic visions up there that are typical for Whistler or a certain company or whatever. Your core values. And if you have that vision and those core values informed by the principles of sustainability, by the way, by putting something you're longing for outside what can be, now you are prepared to define your strategic goals. And now you develop your strategic plans and action programs not only to become sustainable or avoid cancer, but to meet your vision at large. And what we do more and more in this organization is that we systematically help organizations do precisely that. They think they have a vision, generally they don't. It is not robust enough. Finally, a few words about the process. How do we implement this into local governments? And generally, by just looking what the most successful ones are doing, like Whistler and Cairn, they are working with that vision. In this case, envisioned as the 2020 vision statement of Whistler, for instance. And a few people begin doing it and exposing the big audience, the general public, that this is now happening, and this is, by the way, the early drafts of it, and so forth. Then you move into expert groups and have them do their ABCDs based on that. Where are the problems? Where are the assets today? What are the possible solutions here in Whistler, wherever we are? And what will be some smart early moves to get there? And this then engaged, the outcome of that is now engaged on the structural elements of the government, political parties and non-elected officials and so forth and so on. And the outcome of those ABCDs are then going back into learning loops, into feedback loops, partly also refining the vision itself, because that's not written in stone, in particular not in the early days of this. And these stars only mean that you need education, of course, and a facilitator like Lisa or Ken or whoever knows this, so that the talks do not confront people in the groups with values too early, but that the knowledge and the possibilities, the big family game is unfolding in a smart way first before you start to confront values. This is an example, and I asked Ken if I was allowed to use it in his presence. And then he said, so what are you going to say? And I rehearsed and then said, okay, you can say that. First of all, there are many, many different sectors to think about. And if you don't have a framework to link it all together, it becomes a bit fuzzy. Do you recognize this? And that picture comes from Ken's presentation as well. He's also aware of all the tools, and many of them are good, but how do you make better use of them? Again, by use of the unifying framework. And following this, you recognize this, you have a vision where you want to be, you scrutinize it through the frame of the 4 principles, and then you expose current reality with the challenges and the assets, and then you start to stepwise move in that direction. And now I will give you an example of what happens if you do. This is, as you know, the region, the municipality where they will have the next Winter Olympics. And they got a proposal from the local utility company to bring a pipeline for natural gas all the way up to Whistler. Why? Because natural gas emits less carbon per energy utility than fossil fuels of other types do, petroleum for instance. So they said that's a good step in the right direction. And then the political establishment says, but wait a minute, in the future we don't have natural gas because it inherently violates that first principle. So even if it's moving a bit in the right direction, it cannot take us all the way. So why would we then spend so much money on that pipeline that we would in fact be married to the idea of natural gas? So the result from this was that they applied the strategic guideline questions and said, will it move towards sustainability principles? Yeah. The emissions of carbon to the atmosphere will be less. Check. Is that a flexible platform towards complete success, taking money into account? And the answer was no. We will get married to natural gas, and since that big investment was so big, we will now follow up with all kinds of end-of-pipe uses for natural gas, which would be even more expensive, and eventually we would be linked to natural gas. Instead, they downsized the whole business to free money to stepwise and in parallel with the pipeline, develop sustainable energy systems, and as a result, the Olympic Village will be completely fueled by sustainable energy sources. So now the final conclusion. They got a number of prizes for this, which is very, very nice to see. This is acknowledged, which is the first thing you need to do if you want to be a role model, you know. But there will be some visibility also to others, if you want to save the world, and not only wisdom. What about objections? How many recognize this? We can't afford it. It's invalid, of course. It's unsustainability that cannot be afforded by all the reasons we talked about. What about this? We can't afford it now. It's like, I'm going to quit smoking, only not today. But it's not only psychologically doubtful what this stands for, it's completely invalid. In the framework we are promoting, we don't say get poor now to get some benefits later on. We say make businesses in such a way that it opens doors to the future and is good enough for money to sustain the process, which is in the D step of the framework. This is another one. We can't afford going all the way. It only means that you're planning for bankruptcy later on. Why? But there's one objection, which is completely valid. And if you hear someone saying this, it's probably someone who got it, to use Ray Anderson's words. We can't afford going all the way on our own fast enough. What does that mean? It means the following. Remember what I said at the first slide. If nobody else is doing this, only you, it's still good for your business. But it means that you are on Titanic now. So you're running first class on Titanic. You're sitting there, you're enjoying first class. Your costs are relatively smaller than the competitors who have bad luck all the time in the walls of the funnel, since it's a dynamic game. You're ahead of the game, so you're enjoying first class. But having been on Titanic for some time, you get a bit nervous. And you want to get out and maybe change the course of Titanic. You need to talk to the captain. So you merge forces with others. Nobody can do sustainability for the whole world on their own. And that's when you need cross-sector cooperation. So my organization, the United Step, which I founded, is now moving from helping one university after another, one municipality after the other, and so forth, to work as a facilitator between organizations to launch joint ventures to increase leverage. And to that end, we have just recently scored with the highlight of my academic career. And that's the final slide. We have said that to Swedish governments, agencies, that we want to launch an ongoing scientific program by which we're going to scrutinize this framework, criticize it, and destroy it and put it together even more and equip it with even more refined tools for management and monitoring and indicators and life cycle assessments and models for product development and system dynamics modeling and so forth and so on. And then they said, yeah, it's a wonderful idea, but we don't have any program for that. So they only talked about cross-sector cooperation as a buzzword. And they all said the same. We went from one agency to the other. And then we turned back to them and say, if not one of you can do it alone, why don't you merge forces, walk the talk, and fund jointly what not one single of your agencies can do. So then, Swedish Energy Agency, the Swedish EPA, Formas, Vinnova, and Nutec moved together and are now funding a 10-year scientific program. And the beauty of it all are the petals of this flower. Because already as I speak, We have a growing number of universities across the globe merging forces with us and using the same 5-level framework for their scientific studies, thereby enabling cross-fertilization between the petals and, of course, criticizing the core when they are pursuing their respective fields of expertise. Anything from saving the local governments around the River Rhine from flooded systems and climate change, together with Nijmegen University, to scrutinizing the term eco-efficiency as such at Åbo University, or developing biofuels from algae in Australia. So the conclusions? Again, this is more about competence than values. If I fail to make that point, that's a miserable outcome of this presentation. The leaders own the problem. They must understand on that level the challenges and the opportunities and stop saying that the tougher legislation will distort competition and that kind of babbling. Experts like myself are amateurs on leading big complex systems such as municipalities in the big complex system of the biosphere. So the leaders must know that themselves. Laying out the big general plan and then asking the right questions to experts. Today they instead, some leader likes nuclear power. They like it because they've always liked it. They've been in the sauna talking to their peers. Yes, that's really good technology and so forth, so they like it. Others only like biofuels and not nuclear power. And each of them can find their respective expert who justify that they are right. Which is a way of abusing science and is a way of abusing leadership. Instead, we should scrutinize future energy systems by these principles and ask ourselves, how can we stepwise move there and find different routes in that direction, not liking any of those inherently unsustainable ways of doing it as we are today. I personally believe that unless we can share robust principles for the outcome, we will fail. It's not enough with intent. We need to do that to make better use of all the tools and make more robust plans. We have an international research program up and running, just launched 9 of May. And what the world needs today more than anything are role models doing it. If I would give you any advice at all, because most of you in this room are experts more than I am on what you are doing in concrete terms, it would be 2 things. Institutionalize the process, meaning that it's not enough understanding the framework and then hope for something to happen. You must institutionalize a systematic rehearsal of where are we now, related to your goal, revise, having learning loops, and having that happening in an institutionalized way. And remember, don't teach and then hope something happens. Allow them doing it, being the teaching. So take the opportunity right away and start launching early moves. And finally, the municipality network shows the way. I mean, you are the role models. And in one way, it might be nice for you to hear that you are the best in the world saving it, but you must admit, on another level, it's quite scary that you guys are the best in the world saving it. Nevertheless, regardless of that, I can find of no more inspirational, no more important, and no more dignified endeavor or task. So thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you very much, Kalle.
I just would like to say that. Yes.
So we're just going to take a few moments to switch over technology. And we will take questions after Torbjörn's talk from Carl Henrik and Torbjörn.